especially in my lives, I really try to lean into how whatever battle I'm talking about, whether it's 30 years ago or 2000 years ago, how that impacts today, right? And
Yeah.
the one I did a couple days ago, I was talking about a battle most people never even heard of, the Second Battle of Bedriacum in Italy, and this literally redefined Rome. It
Hmm.
ended the year of the four emperors, and because Vespasian came out on top, it changed everything for Rome. And because of that, everything thereafter, there's an implication to that, right? So you can
Right.
draw these lines throughout history, and we can't
In
just
its sex.
yeah. And you
And
can't
most
just
people
go,
don't see
oh, that
it.
was 2,000 years ago. What do I care? Like, we do
Hmm.
care because that's
Yeah.
why we're here.
I think it was Discovery Channel. Mike Rowe, he had this thing like it's like was it 6 steps of separation, something to that effect. I
Yep.
love that show because like they take this guy over here doing this, and then it goes all the way up to the jet airplane that we fly in today. This guy weaving something back. You know what I mean? It's
Totally.
really interesting when you really think about it. Those lines of separation, how we are very well connected to past. The problem is that people don't have enough common sense to study it and to know it.
Right. Right.
You know
And
what I mean?
we do things. I mean, and this is just human of us, but it's easier for us to like pack things into boxes when we're taught things. So, for example, I do a lot of
Hmm.
stuff on the California genocide right now. But when we're taught, if we're taught, but when we're taught about the Indian Wars, that's exactly how we're taught about it. It's this
Yeah.
bucket that they're all in there. We fought them. It was bad. We focus a lot on the cool imagery. So it's the cowboys, chasing them
Right.
down, bows and arrows, that whole thing. The reality of the Indian Wars is that it started, well, if you don't count the British era, it started the moment we declared independence. The Cherokee declared war on us in 1776.
Hmm.
So, and
Right.
that war with the Cherokees lasted longer than our own revolution. So we started fighting them with muskets and, long trains in the forests of Tennessee. And the last Indian War was in 1923. And we used planes
Oh,
and we used bombs and machine guns. So you can't just say the Indian Wars. This stretched across the continental United States. It was fought with hundreds of different tribes, different ways. And I get why we do that, but it there's a problem with that, and it dilutes
oh yeah.
what the importance of the history. So I try to bring that out, not only to respect the people that fought, right, on both sides, but to really be like, guys, there's so much more here, and it matters today because there's people. I mean, 1923, my grandfather was 12 years old. Like, that's not that long ago. So
Exactly. That is just a moment of history. Just literally a second ago, this happened in the grand scope of things. And that's what's also very interesting too, because most people don't realize, as you said, the genocide and what that really was.
right.
Because it wasn't the whole portrayal of the guy riding the horse with the flag, yeehaw, you know what I mean? There were
Exactly.
women and children starved to death, forced out on those marches to cross the plains and of course not proper attire, not proper food, not proper nurse, no nothing, and they were forced, and then they just slowly died away. And it was the easier way to kill them all than opposed to
Yeah.
shooting. You know what I mean? You would, yeah, yeah. You got to come back to DC. They changed a lot of cool stuff. you know,
Yeah,
so
it's just interesting, and I try to remain objective about it and just present the facts, and I try to do it in a fun way. You know what I mean? Where it's not just droning on, and
mhm.
at this time on this date. Like, I try to go to fun places, make it fun, interact, and all of those things, because I just find so much utility in studying the past and applying it to the present. And I think if more
Yes,
people did that, we would just be a more progressive society. We would have better technology. We'd be using it better. We would be understanding each other better. We'd be better interconnected in an already globalized world. I just,
yeah. And that's one thing you mentioned that was kind of interesting, and that's one of the goods and bads of this wonderful app that we're trying to work with. It is such a fantastic tool to reach the masses, but it is such a deadly thing for the masses if not
Yep.
used properly. You know,
Oh
because
yeah.
I will tell you the mind numbingness, the I want to say like the degradation of the mental capacity gets
Hmm.
a little you know what I mean?
Totally.
Um, yeah, because I mean, obviously, we are all of the generation before the smartphone. We were all the generation where we go ride bikes, we go out
Yep.
till dark. You know what I mean? Mom would
Yep.
yell at us when the street lights come on. We would
Yep.
be out till 10 o'clock during the summer having fun, getting into a little trouble. But
Yep.
nowadays, I don't see my kids sometimes, and I wonder where they're at. They're up in their room playing on their phone.
Yeah. And and the one consistent compliment I think that I get from viewers is thank you for presenting something that isn't mind numbing. That isn't just
Yes.
oh group 7 or this. It's something that, but it's also not just dry information. It's they're interested, they get pulled in. So
Yeah.
that's been the best feedback that I've received because I do this because I love it. But if it's actually
Mhm.
benefiting people and they're like, thank God I'm scrolling and finding something that, makes me
It
think
perks some
and
brain cells up and gets me
yeah,
moving, gets me thinking.
yeah.
Yes. Instead of the mind numbing thing. And that's where again too, I think you could make a trip over to Gettysburg here and just a little bit on that East Coast, Harper's Ferry. You could have enough
Oh,
content
I
for a
loved
year at
Harper's
least.
Ferry.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh, loved Harper's Ferry. All of those. When I lived there, I went to all of them. I went to all of them. I couldn't get enough of that stuff. Wish I was
Yeah.
doing this back then. And that's what I love most about history is I think if you want to be, you can connect to that kind of stuff. You go to
Yeah.
these places and you can just
Yeah.
feel that energy where people existed and lived and had emotions and all of these things. It's just and that's one of the commonalities throughout history is conflict has been a present, but so has the human element. And that's why
Hmm.
I always try to bring up the casualties. And it's once they hit that data sheet, it doesn't matter what they were fighting for anymore. It's
Right.
these were human beings. They had wives, they had children, they had brothers and sisters and family members. And we can't lose sight of that, right? The
Right.
why and the how that we got there, that's a different conversation. And that's a political conversation that doesn't have answers to it. But
Hmm.
this piece, the human piece, is whether you're a Greek hoplite going off to fight, the Persians, or if you're a U.S. soldier, fighting in Niger, though that human element doesn't change. And
Right.
I try to, keep that in the foresight as I do these things because I want to have fun. I want it to be, interesting and everything, but that poignancy has to be there to really drive it home. Like this is real stuff.
And there's also that point of connection too, as you said. It really to think about and look in the eyes of the photograph and look in the eyes of those people. They're just like you. They're just like me. They had a belief, they had a structure, and they believed enough to have that ultimate sacrifice in a wartime situation to deal with things. Or again, they had passion enough to study, they had passion enough to design, they had passion enough to work hard to develop the latest and greatest farm, the latest and greatest whatever. They had a
Yeah.
passion and they had a vision, and that's also something to connect to, not just in a wartime format. But again, you think about, Edison running around, Michigan and spending late nights drinking coffee, trying to figure out how is he going to develop this? How is he going to develop that? Think about Nikola Tesla and the great
Oh man,
epiphanies he had, and think about
totally.
Ford over there in Dearborn, doing his thing, late at night, but it makes that connection. It's not just a car, but there's passion behind this. There's passion with people. Same thing here. Same thing with what you're trying to do. You have passion for giving the knowledge, you know what I mean? And expressing it in a way to where the next generation can pick it up, understand it, move forward with it, and
Yeah.
hopefully carry that on. And that legacy that you present, and that's the cool thing about the internet. It never forgets and it's
Yeah.
always around. If you do it
Yeah.
right, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
But and that's why this is, doing these interviews, doing these things, talking to small base creators, but talking to people with passion. This will stay on YouTube forever and ever and ever. And where is this going to generate? And what life is it going to touch? a year from now? Are you going to bring the next wave of historians in college to, I watched this guy. This guy was great, and
Yeah.
now I want to do this.
Yeah.
We all know the TV show back in the early 2000s, House. The Doctor Show.
Oh yeah.
You
Oh
know,
yeah.
but I love the fact, though, and I love the fact it is just TV show, some actors and characters, you know what I mean? But that season finale, that last thing, and I love that part where so many people were inspired because of the rhetoric, because of the terminology, because of the interest, because of the passion. They wanted to become doctors, and they did,
Yeah.
and how many lives were saved because of a TV show?
Right.
You know what I mean? How many
Exactly.
historians come into play because they watched this interview, because they watched this on YouTube, and they
Yeah.
started watching you, and they're like, "Hey, I want to do that. I want to learn about that. That's interesting."
Right. And
And that's
it's
what really brings it to
yeah.
life.
Yeah, I agree completely. And for me, that's down the road. I want to be an actual professor. I would love to do that. I still have some things I want to do beforehand, but what I've realized through my life, being a soldier, going to war, I've sat with generals, becoming a diplomat, working at state, I've sat with presidents of countries. We're all people. Like
Hmm.
it's all the same. And what I also have realized is that there's a missing piece in education when it comes to our voting populace. And when it comes to
Yes.
conflict, we have to hold people accountable. These
Hmm.
are, you know, th- these are things that we have to scrutinize deeply. And that's a part of this. If anything, if I could touch one person and make them realize that they need to remain humble no matter where
Yep.
they are on the
Yep.
spectrum, right? You're still just a dude or a gal.
Hmm.
Like you're just a person and you're going to see that in other people. They're just people trying to get by and they just happen to have this opportunity to be a general to do this. But it's Spider-Man. I mean, with responsibility comes or power and authority comes great responsibility, right?
Very
And
much so. Yes.
we have to hold the people that harness that authority accountable when it comes to things like conflict. We've only been at peace 11% of our time on this earth. That's not
Wow.
enough. And in the United States, we have never had an administration of peace. We have always had
Hmm.
soldiers fighting or overseas doing stuff. So
Very much. Yeah, it's true.
I want to generate thought, right? It's not to make a lean this way or that. Was just generate thought. Why is that the case? Why
Right.
has the globe been at war for 88% of its existence? Why is America so, clung to this idea of exporting conflict? Why can't are we okay with that? If someone came in and said, "We're bringing them home, we're just going to sit down, nothing's going to happen for 8 years," would we be okay with that? If yes, great. If not, why? I just want to generate that thought as these kids are coming up and becoming voters and thinking about how this impacts them, their children in the future, all of that. So if I could do that to just a few people in the rest of my life, then it would all be worth it.
And again, that's what I always believe, that everything happens for a reason in life. I truly believe that. I don't believe a lot in coincidence or coincidence, because
Right.
again, everything happens for a reason. If you are smart enough to think about the car accident that happened 10 years ago, made me meet this person in the hospital, which led me to this, you know what I mean? If you
Yep.
can really, as you say, Spider-Man, the points of our lives, and you can really see what's going on, it also kind of makes sense. But to answer your one question, is the reason why we go to war, I hate to say this, is power and money.
100%.
As a
Money.
society, is
Yeah.
power and
Yeah.
money.
And underneath it all is fear.
Yeah.
We are at the end of the day, and it's not pejorative, but the reality is we're prey. In a world of predator and prey, we're not predators. We don't have fangs, we don't have claws, we don't run super fast, we can't fly. We're prey. We got a big brain that keeps us safe, but at the end of the day, if it's you and a tiger, you're losing every time. So,
Right. Yeah. Very
you
much so.
know,
Yes.
and that creates this inherent capability of fear. And for those that know how to manipulate that fear, you can say, our neighbors are danger, or they have more resources than us. They want our resources for us. That's a threat. We get afraid. And it just becomes a manipulation of that characteristic that's inherent in our DNA for the very few to get rich and to stay in power. And that
Hmm.
cross time, it doesn't matter, throw a dart at the board. Every single conflict is driven by those three things. Absolutely.
Yep. Very much so. I completely agree with that. And that is very true. Money and power, and yeah, fear. What is going to happen if they? What
Yep.
happens if they don't? What happens if they do? And if you think about it too, if you really get into it, the whole Civil War conflict was based on fear. Because
100%.
you think about it, Abraham Lincoln was just inaugurated when it all started coming about because he was so anti-slavery. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? But in his speech, not in policy, but in his speeches, again, and those people immediately thought, well, wait a minute, since now he's going to become president, this is going to happen, so we need to start first. It
Yep.
wasn't about talking. It wasn't about resolution. It wasn't about, you know, dealing with a situation rationally. It's let's go by force. And there it
You
is.
know, and like most conflict, that narrative, that rhetoric was driven by a very few people. It was the people that
Hmm.
had the money, that had
Yep.
this established sense of power, right? And being a slave owner is inherently one of being in power, of being in control, right?
Right,
So
right.
the thought of losing that control, human beings don't do well with loss of control. So
No.
you generate the fear. You say, "Oh, you all are going to lose everything you have," and then you start. It's the straw man arguments and all of these other things that come up through it. But whether it's our Civil War or World War II, or you can go way back, where propagated fear is used to rise up the population to believe in a cause, to export conflict, right? And
Right.
that's where it comes from.
You
And
speak of
that's
that,
what
and again, I mean, that was Hitler right there,
upset.
pro- propagating the fear, and again, he utilized that with the youth and brought it forward,
Yep.
created that dialogue. But I mean, that's right on the money. That's how he manipulated to kill millions upon millions of people because of what?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Women and children, because of they come from a lineage that he had issues with as a child.
Yeah,
The Hitler did, you know what I mean?
exactly. Exactly. It's just, or Cold War, right? That was a war of ideology. Oh, they
Hmm.
do this. Both sides. Oh, capitalists do this. Oh, communists are this way. I have I've been to 28 countries. I have
Wow.
served in war. I have served in peace. I have been a diplomat. I have been at State Department and other capacities. I have seen the world. And at the end of the day, the people, the they in all of these conversations, they're just human beings.
Hmm.
They want everything that we want. They want their children to be safe, secure, fed, and loved, and they want to have a little bit of frickin' fun. That's it.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it is a small minority that attach to ideology and scream it from the mountaintops. But because it's so loud, it can be used as propaganda by the other sides. And that's universal. And
Hmm.
this is the kind of stuff that I try to weave into my reels and my lives to generate that kind of thought in people that are, coming up and have fresh brains, but also people that are just smarter than me and can take something like that and run with it and maybe
Hmm.
make a little bit of a difference for the better.
And that's the big thing too, is a small bit of history knowledge. Again, as they always say, you're always destined to repeat your history. You're always destined to repeat history if you don't learn from it. But again, you can take those scenarios and just that simple conversation that we talked about
Yeah.
that happened, decades and decades and decades ago, of how these things happen was the manipulation of people. And again, you say it loud enough and you say it long enough and you repeat it enough time and then it becomes truth.
Right. And even for those that don't necessarily believe it, like, you put two people in a square, right? You put them on a box and you get them talking about things. If somebody on on a box is saying, "Hey, love one another, treat each other with respect, use discourse to figure out things, come to compromise," all of that, it's going to have a very small crowd. But if you
Oh
have
yeah,
somebody on
certainly
the other
so.
side that says, "He is this, they want
Hmm.
that," you are going to and you're just screaming. You may be the only person in the world that believes that, but you're certainly going to get people to listen because you're loud. And
Hmm.
it's it comes from a place of fear. It activates that part of our brain that makes us go, shit, maybe I need to listen to this kind of thing. Or even if I say, you know what, it doesn't resonate, this guy's a nut job, I'm still pulled in by just the insanity of it, right?
Yeah.
The type of words, the inflammatory language. So again, this is a thing where it's like there's a persistence in objectivity that has to just keep chipping away to bring light to that so that people realize that the majority of us are actually in the center. And the
Hmm.
loudness that you hear is a minority. And if we can activate that central body, we might be able to reduce how much conflict we see in the future with our kids and
Yeah.
our grandkids. And that's what I
Yeah.
hope for.
Yeah, and I will say this, again, I don't care about your political affiliation, but we can definitely agree politics is one of the worst things out there that, and especially, I'm 47, 48, again, it just within the past since, 90s, I mean, maybe I was paying more attention to it, but
Right.
it's like, the political charge just instill and put so much fear into people because these people are bad, these people are good, this is that, this is good. And again, you can go all the way back into Iran, you can go back into, well, my goodness, you go back into the 70s where Carter was, people had fear of
Mhm.
Russia, people had fear of this, but that's how they drove people to not, see what this hand is doing, but don't worry about this hand over here. We're good.
Exactly.
And
And it's
again,
as
that
old as
also,
time.
oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, that never changes. But it also, um, getting to your point, if you can get a few people to say, wait a minute, let me look, let me
Yeah.
see, let me think, instead of he's speaking louder, so he must know the truth.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's just
Right.
what it is. It's sad
And
because that is human nature.
yeah, and really, I think that the threat of, oh, he's loud, he must be true, is less than he's loud and it's scary, so I'm just going to put blinders on. Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's where I think a lot of human beings are right now. But I mean, you can go
Hmm.
back when it comes to that kind of stuff. I mean, you can go back to Jefferson's and I mean, Jackson's election campaign. I mean, they annihilated his wife in that campaign.
Yeah.
Just horrible rhetoric, right? And
Hmm.
so this is part of the American experience in a way. But what I really want people to lean into is this idea about uh, the conflict side of the house. Why are we so reactive? Why are we constantly
Yeah.
in conflict? And I just want, the 80 million people that didn't vote, I want them to realize that they can take the blinders off and they can listen to these other objective areas
Hmm.
and they can make a decision and it will drive forward progress, right?
Yeah.
Don't get squashed down. And I try to frame that in the context of military history and all the things that have come from it.
Well, that's one of the things too. Speaking of that, and that is a very valid point because again, regardless, like you say, of political affiliation, I'm not trying to get into that kind of a topic, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it is responsibility because those people that have come before you, those people that, and even in different nations too, not just in the United States, but those people have come before you that have had enough passion to fight for those beliefs, to fight for that document sitting down there in D.C. because
Yep.
of a passion of belief of what the American experiment, as I always call it, it really
Yeah.
is, and to sit there blindside with your blinders on and blame the rest of the world, regardless of you had an opportunity to voice that opinion. You had that opportunity, and it's a civic duty, no less, as an American
Absolutely.
citizen, to honor the sacrifice of those people before you that died in commitment of that piece of paper, those beliefs. And you're just kind of just, yeah, whatever, I'm good. I'm going to go play on my phone.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you're going to
And
complain about your taxes. You're going to complain about this. You're going to, you know what I mean?
exactly.
It's like
Yeah.
you had a
And
chance.
it it's and it is scary. It's scary to try to make a decision that may be wrong, that may lose. I mean, these are all realities, and I get it. But history tells us that if you stand on the sideline, you eventually will get caught up in the storm, and then you'll
Yes.
have no ground to, no leverage, no support, right? And that's what I want to bring to the table. It's like, guys, educate yourself. So for example, one of the really cool things that you can draw a line to in our own history is right now there's a lot of questions about Venezuela and how is this legal, and
Hmm.
even Iraq and Afghanistan. It's like, but Congress hasn't declared war, so how do we do this? You go all the way back to George W., the original
Hmm.
one, George
Right.
Washington.
Yep.
After the Revolutionary War, we disbanded the military. We did not have a military. So one of the things that came out of that is uh, Congress had promised the soldiers, because they couldn't pay them, when the war was over, we would give them land. So
Right.
when that happened, they came to get the land. Well, there wasn't enough land in the 13 colonies to give to the thousands of soldiers that. So what ended up happening is these soldiers just said, "Screw it, we're moving to the Northwest Territory, and we're just going to take land there," right? So
Hmm.
Ohio and generally that area. Well, that wasn't
Right.
our land. That was sovereign Confederate Indian land, and it
Mm.
created the Northwest Indian War. Well, we didn't have an army to
Okay.
fight, so we also knew that if we declared war through our Constitution, it would bankrupt us. We were already
Right. Right.
bankrupt,
Right. We just
right?
fought one.
We owed France a ton of money. We didn't
Uh-huh.
have enough money to go around. So George Washington realized we can't declare war, but Secretary of War Henry Knox said, U.S. citizens are in Ohio. They're getting killed. We need something to protect them." So he went to Congress and he said, "Will you give me the authority to send a small group of United States troops to protect our people in the Northwest Territory?" And they said, "Yes, but you have to report back to us every 60 days to renew any kind of further campaign." And
Hmm.
that was revived with President Nixon. And if you look at our history, it was used in small part by every single president, but it was
Right.
revived by Johnson and Nixon to get as many soldiers as we had into Vietnam, and then it was recreated by the Bush administration after 9/11 to justify Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that kind of knowledge helps us realize how we've gone from 6 conflicts under Washington to something like 28 today
Wow.
without declaring war. We've only declared war, I think, 11 times,
Right. Right.
and most of those are within the confine of one. So when we declared war in Japan, Congress did that. We declared war in
Right.
Germany. So each one counts as declaring war. But when you
Mm-hmm.
really look at it, we have not declared war that many times, but we've never had an administration of peace. So understanding why that can happen helps us make educated decisions, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. And that's one thing. I mean, that's now we're going to jump off topic, but a little bit. But that's one thing too that is the catch-22. Why are we all over the place? You know what I mean? Is it?
mhm,
It's been said several times over decades. We are the world's police, but are we, or are we the ones going in and grabbing oil from Iraq and then pumping it up to Turkey and then pushing it around? The next thing you know, Exxon has contracts worth trillions of dollars for oil. Makes you wonder.
yup,
I'm a big
yup,
conspiracy theory guy, you know what I mean? But why are we in certain areas when we don't have business being there? Now, don't get me wrong. You always want to take care of, the governments of, like Nazis and Russia, or not Russia, Nazis in Germany at that
yup.
time, they were doing really bad stuff. You know what I mean? Japan, I mean, you think about it, they kind of started the war, well, at least my understanding, they kind of got into this because they were concerned that we were going to cut off oil and cut off resources to them.
We
So they're
have,
like, hey, we
yeah.
need to do something now. We're going to attack, we're going to wake this up because we're going to show our position that you need to negotiate. You need to talk to us because we're just as important as them. You know what I mean? And that's when they're like, they had a lot of paranoia and fear, thinking we were going to
They-
come after them for
Yep.
resources because we weren't giving them resources.
And it all goes back to the fear element. And again,
Mhm.
so World War I, we had this massive draft towards the end of the war, brought in hundreds of thousands of people. The war ends. We kind of start to break into the conversation of being one of the big players in the world. But
Right.
what did we do after World War I? We got rid of our military.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
except for a very small component of our Navy, because the Deputy Secretary of the Navy was FDR, he made a campaign to keep some of the ships and then evolve them into aircraft carriers. And
Hmm.
that, honestly, that single decision is one of the only reasons we won World War II in the Pacific. But we
Yes.
didn't have a military, right? We had to. So when World War II kicked off, and I have this conversation a lot with people that I talk to about this. Generally, historians say World War II started September 1st, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland. But the reality is Japan had invaded China long before that,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm.
So realistically, and there were implications there. The remember Hong Kong, Malaysia, all of these areas were colonies, so they
Yeah.
weren't sovereign. So by invading Manchuria and going through China, that put Hong Kong on alert, which put the UK on alert. So now it becomes a global conflict. So
Mm-hmm.
we're watching this, and we don't have a standing military to join the fight. We also are very conflict averse at this point, which is why
Right. We don't want
all
nothing to do
these,
with it.
like the banana wars that we call them, like all
Mm-hmm.
this stuff in the DR and all that, that all had to be done the way that George Washington did it because we were so conflict averse. It took the act of the Japanese to pull us in
Right.
to the
Yep.
conflict, but we still had to create this military out of nothing. And just
Mm-hmm.
where I'm at, the port of Richmond, they were pumping out ships. I think like every 4 days they were creating some type of ship for the war effort. I mean, it was just
That's crazy.
bonkers. And that's what ultimately got us into it. But we what we didn't do after World War II was de-escalate and
No.
demilitarize. And
That's right.
that
We
was
stayed there. That's right. Yep. You
That
got to
was
be that world
Eisenhower's
power.
last note. Yeah.
Yeah, he said that. Yeah, he said that in his 5-word address. Be very careful of the military complex that we just built because it can take over everything. Because again, we may not make the best tanks, but we make a lot of them.
We make a ton of
You
them.
know what I mean? We may not make the best boats, but we make a lot of them. You're not going to sink them all. You know what I mean? And that was one of
Exactly
our
right.
things. You had the refrigerator company making, the frigid airs last week, and now, they're making gun turrets. We had
Exactly.
that immobilization, but that also brought into the patriotism aspect. And there's always that gray zone of we kind of knew this was going to happen, we
Hmm.
just didn't do anything about it because we knew we had to go into it and we needed that vast push as a nation to accept it because we just got out of World War II. We're kind of chilling now. We're hanging out. The sun's are shining. We're buying houses. Everybody's happy.
Yep.
We got the 2 cars in the refrigerator. We don't want to do this. But the
Oh,
entire, European hemisphere is in conflict and we knew we had to get into it. We needed that reason because we just couldn't go over there, knock, knock, knock. Hi, we're the big dogs now. We
right.
needed Pearl Harbor to happen to push us in. And some people even talk about 9/11 was that pinnacle event to gather not only, the motion, but the patriotism. Think about September 12th. Think about September 13th and compare that to the patriotism you see today and news and media and everything else. Night and
Yeah.
day, you
Yeah.
know?
It's super, and this is what drives conflict. That's how you motivate people to fight for a cause. And I think that there are causes worth fighting for. I
Oh
had this
yes, by all means.
conversation with a professor the other day, and it's there is a difference between invading Iraq and protecting your homeland of Ukraine. Like
Hmm.
there's two different conversations there, and there are justifications for both. Fine, but there is a difference between standing in your homeland, fighting against an invader, versus being the invader. And
Right.
as in a democratic society, it is incumbent on us as the voters to understand the difference and to understand the consequences of allowing the decision makers to activate a conflict. And
Yeah.
that's why I do what I do. It's part of why I do what I do, because you can wrap it in a flag every single day, but when does it become propagandized versus
Hmm. Yep.
truly fighting for values that are interwoven with humanity, right? And I
Right.
think
Right.
there's a difference, right? So I try to, and I try to show that, through all of the history I talk about. When I talk about Julius Caesar, and you know, we have to be better as a populace at kind of compartmentalizing conversations. Julius Caesar was one of the best strategists ever in history. He's up there with Alexander the Great, but he
Hmm.
also committed genocide. He also
Yes.
he took over his country, and he
Hmm.
invaded his country and took it over to run it as the sole ruler, right? And
Right.
I'm sure everybody has heard the story that he had to have someone behind him say, "You are a human being. You are a human being. You are a human being," to remind him that he wasn't a god. That's
Hmm.
how elevated he was. So but both things can be true. He can be one of the best strategists in the world and be ultimately a villain, right?
Yeah.
And
Very much so.
and we
Yes.
and we have to be okay with that conversation. We have to, like, not say, well, this is my idol, right? Like MacArthur, more contemporary, Douglas MacArthur. Like
Hmm.
so many things I can pull out of the air about Douglas MacArthur. He's the only engineer to be the chief of staff of the military. He's, I mean, a hero in World War One and World War Two. All of these things, but he
Hmm.
also activated his tanks and had them run through the bonus army World War One soldiers who were asking for compensation and that pitched tents in D.C. And he ran over them with tanks and he killed a significant amount of them.
I did not know
Both
that.
both of those
Right.
things are true, right?
Uh-huh.
And we have to be able to stomach that. We have to, so I try to interweave it so that when we do get to the present day, we can have conversations where it's like, listen, it's not black and white, guys. We have to learn how to navigate the gray area and have real conversations about the good and the bad and come together as a society, especially when it comes to conflict, about whether or not this is actually what's good for us.
And
And
that's one
in
thing too is I mean I've never been in the military. I've never seen battle. I have not seen the outcomes of war. I have not seen a small infant child dead because of starvation. I have not had I'm fortunate not to have seen that. But
right.
that's the other big thing too, as we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, is those images, those things, they need to be seen because again, it's not about, waving the American flag over the hill, but what it was, what it cost to get there. And was again, as you said, the justification of that valid. Not just American soldiers dead, but what about the small 12-year-old little girl running across the street that got fragged out by a stray bullet and she's now dead when she was just
Right.
getting water for her mother?
Right.
And those part of humanity, those stories and those things,
Yeah.
and that's
Absolutely.
and again that is the how many of those people. I mean, you still think about too. Talk about the Civil War. You talk about Pickett or not Pickett, Custer and
Yeah.
his campaigns through Mississippi, and he was annihilating everything,
Hmm.
bugs, cattle, sheep, everything, kids,
Everything.
everything,
Yep.
firing entire towns because of a cause, because the Union knew they had to break the lines, they had to break the spirit, because once you did that, and
Yeah.
again, I'm just using it as a case point of reference, but that is the ugly face of that war, that conflict.
Yeah.
What purpose did it serve, and was that service again, having those gray zone conversations, that kind of an
Yeah,
action, that kind of sacrifice, that kind of thing wasn't worth it, you know?
right. Absolutely.
It's a
One of the
conversation, I'll be
most
honest, it'd be difficult for me to have.
it is, and it's okay that it's difficult. And I think that's another thing is we got to get more comfortable with having these difficult conversations and not let them get to a place of attack just because they're
Yeah,
uncomfortable, right?
yeah.
But I remember, one of the most poignant memories I have from my first tour in Afghanistan. I came across this old Afghan and his family, and he had one leg, and he just had one of those kind of wooden,
Hmm.
crutches. And I got to talking to him, and he had lived through the golden days of Afghanistan when people were using, going to Kabul to go skiing. It was a top 10
Hmm.
ski resort. Um, he was there when the Soviets came in and toppled it all over, and it just turned it into hell. And then he was there when the Taliban came in and changed it to a whole different type of hell. And
Right,
then we came in and we're doing what we're doing. And you could just see in his eyes how exhausted he was to have had to have lived through all of that. And
right,
he lost his leg from a landmine from the Soviets, but that almost was the sense that I got was that he was willing to lose the leg if it meant that he didn't have to live through this anymore. Like
right,
that's the
right.
thing that really touched me was like, you know, like Plato said, the war only ends for those that are dead. So
Hmm.
living
Hmm. Yep,
living through
yep.
the experience of seeing innocent people get hurt and killed is an awful one, and it needs to stay at the forefront of all these conversations. But really, when you get into those that have lived through this and have to live beyond this and just that exhaustion again, we are all the same at the end of it. We want our families to be healthy, safe, fed, a roof, and we want to have a little bit of fun. That's
Hmm.
it, whether we're in the like the hills of Afghanistan, or if we're in New York City. At the end of the day, you take a poll, I'd say 80% or higher just want those basic things, man.
Yeah.
That's what
And the
really
people,
hit me.
and you have those people that are loud, springing from the outside corners, the minority guiding the masses because they're louder, because they've
Yeah,
invoked the fear, they've invoked the patriotism, they invoked,
bingo.
whatever emotion which guides us. Because again, emotions are very powerful, and people have. I mean, my goodness, think about it. You go home and your wife's sleeping with with another man. Next thing you know, you pull your gun out. That's
Yep.
passion there. That's just,
Passion.
yeah, exactly. And how you can invoke that again, yeah, yeah, it's
And
all
I,
human nature in the sense if you can really, if you can break it down to the 4 or 5 key elements of the basics, as you said, human nature on why things happen, how things happen throughout history. And
yeah,
people think, because we're a modern society, because we got the cool little cell phones, and we got the ticky ticky tock, you know what I mean? We got fidget pens that somehow we're more evolved as a society, but we're not. We
no.
really
So
aren't.
so much
You
of
know,
this is written into our DNA. And the other thing I want to say is that when you look across history, there is a fine line difference with significantly different outcomes when you evoke patriotism versus nationalism, and they look and feel very similar.
they
World
do.
War World War
Yeah.
II, that was patriotism. We
Mm-hmm.
are being called into action to prevent this spread of fascism, right? Japan, Italy, Germany, they were all
Mm-hmm.
fascists at their
Yes.
base. We need to protect humanity. You and Americans, all of us, whether you're, an Irishman in Boston or an Italian in New York, or your people go back to the revolution and you're living in Alabama, it doesn't matter. Americans have been made to this call to protect humanity. That's
Yes.
patriotism.
Yes. Yes.
What Mussolini did, what Stalin did, what Hitler did, what Hirohito did, that is nationalism. They are wrong.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
are the problem. They. We are the only ones who are right. That's a different
Yes.
narrative. That's a different rhetoric, and there's a different outcome because they
Well,
believe that there are no consequences because we are the best, right?
because what we're
Whereas
doing, we're operating in the right no matter what because it's for the mother countries or the fatherland. You know, it is
Exactly.
for the country in itself, not for the people, but for the belief and ideology that we hold dear. And yes, yeah, I get exactly what you're saying.
Yep.
That makes total sense. And you know, I hate to say this too, and I don't want to throw this go too deep or be offensive, but that's also a lot part. That's a lot of religion too in that
Oh
statement
yeah.
too. You
Oh
know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. And again,
So.
I think there's a parallel. Again, I think objectively, you can have this conversation academically, you can. So, in the same way that there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism, there's a very big difference between religion and faith, right?
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Faith is what can get us up in the morning. Faith is what can help us push through the hardest time. Faith is what can connect us as people, just like patriotism can, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
religion can be divisive. It can call for action, for horrible things to happen, all because
Hmm.
this is what's right, right? So there
Yeah,
are
look at the
very deep
Crusades.
parallels between the two things,
Look at the
and
Dark
it
Ages.
yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, and and again, it's about education. It's not
Yeah.
about it's not about saying this is the right thing, right? Because that would defeat the whole purpose. It's about, guys, look at these connections. Look at the
Right.
parallels. Look at what's happened
Hmm.
over and over and over again. Stand in this room and listen to the echo of time, because it may not
Yes.
be the exact same, but it is telling you a story that is reverberating at present time. Listen to it and make
Mhm.
educated decisions about what's happening right now based on that, and just redesign it to match the current day situation. Right? And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I really like that. I really like that too because no matter what, we all think because of our cell phones, because of tiki tiki talk, because of airplanes flying and the Teslas driving around, that we are again some kind of seriously advanced society. But if you really take brass tacks to it, it's just smoke and mirrors, but the core is the same. The core is the same from 50 years ago, from 100 years ago to 1,000 years ago. The core of humanity is the same because we're all interlinked. We're
Yeah,
all in there. We got different toys now. And in
yeah,
25 years, there'll be different toys after that. But the fear, the rhetoric, the emotions of humanity stays the same. As you said, it's ingrained in our DNA, regardless of what language we speak, regardless of our skin tone, regardless of our hairstyles, regardless of our clothing styles. You can see it if you understand it and are able to recognize it. The same things that were going on in the 60s are going on today.
yeah,
You know what I mean? The same thing in
totally.
the 80s, going back, I would say, in the early, teens of 2000 to 15
Mm.
and 20. You had the different points, you had different, but it's all the same consistently over and over and over again. Again, it's just we got different outfits this time, different hairstyles, and we got new technology,
That's right. Yep.
you know?
And it's
But I like
and
that
you
point. And again, history repeats itself over and over again. And you learn from history, you learn from the mistakes of the past, you make that educated decision to move forward with your own life and hopefully make a change.
yeah, and I think if
That's
we
my
can come
philosophy.
together as a community and educate one another and go back to, you know, having discourse again, right? Not debate necessarily. Let's go back to discourse. Let's just talk. And let's do it at
Hmm.
the lowest level, right? Let's maybe tune out some of the stuff that's coming up off the hill. Let's come together
Hmm.
with the people that are living left and right of you, right? Like, let's build bowling leagues again. Let's
No,
get
yeah,
let's get
exactly. You don't. Yeah.
like get Boy Scouts back. Let's create community areas where we can have conversations that aren't so heavy and they're not driven by the minority. And let's ask these questions, right? Why have we never had an administration of peace? What do we think about
Hmm.
that? What, let's generate that thought at the lowest level and let that percolate up, because at the end of the day, we're the ones that give them the power. So
Right.
why don't we wrest that back and come together as a community and figure out what we actually want to rise to the top, so that we don't keep fighting and sending people over to fight conflicts and stretch ourselves thin and all of these things. Like, that's the message that I try to bring to all of my lives and reels and all that.
Hmm. Yeah, and free thought, free thinking. I hate to say this is the dying thing in this generation, in this age. You
Yep.
know, it's all about, as you said, who's yelling highest, who's yelling the loudest at the podium. They must be right. I'm going to go join them. You know, they have the more colorful sign, so I'm going to go there. I'm going to
Yeah.
sit here and listen. And I hate to say this too, because media does such a great job at repetitiveness, repeating it. And what happens if I tell you 1,000 times, you know, you're ugly? One of those times you're going to believe it. And it
Sure.
doesn't matter. You're going to believe it. And it's just that rhetoric over and over and over again. And again, it gets into the people that have power and money want to have power and money. What
Yeah.
do people that have power and money want more of? Power and money.
Yeah.
Whether it's
Absolutely.
a voted office or the guy behind the guy behind the scene, you know.
Yeah.
And it's sad too. I mean, as society goes, they always say it's lambs to the slaughter. It's just sheep. But
Yeah.
it's true because again, forethought and thinking are just. When was the last time there was a serious innovation in the United States?
Right. Exactly.
You know, when was the last time we made a Henry Ford? When was the
Right.
last time beyond Elon Musk with his innovations?
But he's
But
not even an
again,
American.
yeah,
Like he's in
exactly.
South
You know,
Africa.
but and it's like you get into those things. When was the last time we had an Einstein? When was the last time we had an Edison? You know, when was the last time we had an
Right.
Edison? There you go, I'll give you that one. When was
Right.
the
Yeah.
last time we had the Wright brothers? You know
Right.
what I mean?
And
And I'm not talking about taking innovation and building on it. I'm talking about like innovation.
right.
You know,
Homegrown. Yeah.
yeah,
And
life
it's,
changing, world changing things.
yeah. And it's, I think, so, one of my favorite stories of World War II is, again, after World War One, we reduced the military to very, very small numbers.
Because we were
And
never going to get into a battle that big again. I remember
yeah,
that. And we don't need
yeah,
it.
we didn't want
We beat
to,
it
right?
all. We cleaned it up. We're good.
And we were very isolationist at that point. We did not want to do that. And there was still a fear. Remember, 1920 is only, what is that? Hold on, public math.
100
60
years?
years, 60 years from the
Oh,
Civil War.
yes,
So
yes, yes. Sorry, yes.
that's people from the Civil War were still alive in 1920.
Yes.
So there was this
Yep.
fear of having too much military in the United States. And that's why we disbanded it after the revolution. We didn't want
Hmm.
one person in control of a military. But
Right.
what ended up happening is World War II kicks off. We have to do the draft. The patriotism thing comes up. But because people were living their daily lives and using creativity to get through their daily lives without the stress of conflict and all of these other things, what ends up happening is things like this. D-Day, we land on the beaches. We all know that story. But once
Hmm.
we get through the beach, we hit these hedgerows, right? 8 foot tall
Hmm.
hedgerows. Tanks can't get through them. And it's a sniper's paradise. So people are getting picked off left and right, and we have no way to get heavy stuff through it. One soldier, I think he was like a private, right? Somewhere in the private ranks. He takes a welding torch. He finds some scrap metal and he welds on a wedge to the front of one of the tanks, and it cut through the hedgerow like butter.
Hmm.
One of the high-ranking officers says, "You're now a sergeant. You're going to do that to every single tank that hits this beach." But he was a farmer. The kid was and he knew how to activate that creative part of his brain because you don't have an abundance of supply in the 1930s on a farm. You got to make
Hmm.
it work. If your
Right.
tractor goes down, you got to figure it out, Sally. So
Hmm.
they had that inherently built in. And you start to get, that's the ingenuity that we want. That's the ingenuity we want to encourage. And we need to encourage it through thought exercises like this and what I'm trying to do and others are trying to do
Right.
through these reels. And we're using the medium of social media to do that because that's what people are glued to. But the hope is that the balance of mind-numbing garbage versus that kind of thing starts to tilt towards the educational side.